If you are starting a vertical farm and don't know where to begin or which technology would suit your needs, then reach out to the experts at Cultivated. As indoor farm brokers, they help connect you to the right technology and ensure your project is successful. Best of all, their service is free because they work on behalf of their partners. Visit cultivated.com to learn more. And that's spelled cultivated.com, or click the link in the show notes.
The one biggest piece of advice I could give is one of the failures that happens, I think, with most entrepreneurs is that they think if they build it, people will come. And that's the number one mistake, where they have, oh, this is an awesome idea. Like, everyone's going to love it. Like, yeah, this person told me they love it. Da, da, da. And they spend all this time, spend all this money. They build this thing, they create this product, this website, this software, app, or whatever, and then nobody wants it, or nobody downloads it, or nobody buys it. So I think in the beginning, really figure out whether or not your customer actually wants that. Talk to people. Like, it doesn't cost money to interview someone. Just ask them what their pain points are.
Welcome to the Vertical Farming Podcast. Weekly conversations with fascinating CEOs, founders, and agtech visionaries. Join us every week as we dive deep into the world of vertical farming with your host, Harry Duran.
Vertical Farming Podcast, Season 5. Welcome back. First-time listeners, if you are looking for a show where we interview fascinating CEOs and founders of the leading vertical farming communities from around the world, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Harry Duran. In case you missed last episode, we spoke to founder and CEO of Harvests, Ali Daniali. Ali and I connected at the Indoor AgTech NYC conference a couple of months ago, and we had a great conversation where he shared his background in engineering, the origin story of Harvests, and the importance of supporting and promoting small farming both domestically and abroad. It's really interesting what Ali has done with his indoor farming as a service model, and I think we're going to be hearing more about him. This week, I have the pleasure of speaking with founder and CEO of VegBed, Albert Lin. He joins the show today to share the work he's doing to create a better and easier way to use a growing medium for the hydroponic community. As an innovative entrepreneur, this one is especially helpful for those that are just getting started with their idea and their companies in this agtech space. And we had a really good conversation, which I'm excited to share with you. If you enjoyed this episode or past episodes, I'd love it if you leave a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. I'd love to read yours out next. Before we jump into this uninterrupted interview with Albert, a couple of words from the folks that support the show. This episode is brought to you by Vertical Farming Weekly Newsletter. Each week, our team member Noah brings you the latest and greatest in the world of vertical farming. Sign up today at verticalfarmingweekly.com. Albert Lin, founder at VegBed, thank you for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Harry. Excited to be here.
Where are you calling in from?
Right now in northern New Jersey.
Okay. I just got back from the East Coast. I was at Indoor AgCon NYC for 2 days on the Thursday and Friday in Brooklyn. I was at the Marriott, and it's now my second indoor farming conference. And it was nice because it was single track, so there was nothing to, normally sometimes when you go to a conference, you're sort of trying to decide which sessions to attend. And this was nice because they did a really good job. So shout out to the organizers. Have you been to any of the indoor farming conferences yet?
I was actually at Green Tech the previous week.
Okay.
And it was exactly what you were just describing, where it's just such a massive event. There's like 4 different areas of speaking going on. So it's very hard to figure out which one you want to go to.
Yeah.
But it was good. It was a good event. Unfortunately, I caught COVID there. But
oh, no. Yeah.
But so far, the symptoms have been pretty mild. So yeah, it's a good event.
And prior to that, were you a regular attendee of conferences for previous jobs?
Actually, in terms of ag, the Green Tech in Amsterdam is the only one I've been to. I've been in that one twice, and I'm part of the NYC Ag Collective, which is a nonprofit here based in NYC. And we have NYC Ag Tech Week every year, so that's something that we organize that I attend.
And so for folks who haven't attended Green Tech, where exactly was it hosted? And if you could tell me a little bit about it.
Previously, it was in Amsterdam once a year.
Okay.
And now I think they're doing a twice-a-year event. So it's usually once in Amsterdam and then also once in Mexico City. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, usually it's like springtime Mexico, and then the summertime one is in Amsterdam.
Yeah. So for the benefit of the listener, can you rewind the clock a little bit? And I'm just curious where you grew up And when you headed into school, if you knew at that time that what you were studying would eventually lead you to the path you're on now.
Yeah, like my schooling and how I grew up had zero relation to agriculture or anything that I'm doing now. I grew up in Forest Hills, New York. My parents still live in the same childhood house that I grew up in.
Nice.
Went to elementary school there. Ended up going to Carnegie Mellon to get my bachelor's in mechanical engineering, but ended up going into finance after college, and then started working at a couple of startups. And then after a couple of stints at some early stage startups, that kind of got my brain flowing through like the entrepreneurial mindset, and that was kind of how this whole thing started.
Yeah, you had some early experience with was it farm stock?
Yeah, at the time, this was the time when I first started getting into hydroponics, and I got introduced to a friend of a friend who was trying to start an indoor farm in upstate New York. So we got connected. They asked me to join the team. There was about 6 of us, and we were trying to implement like a rotating vertical rack system in upstate New York. Worked on that project for about 9 months, but the main issue with that was like we had all the pieces in place in terms of like the technology, the land, the architect, the survey, all that. But the bulk of the funding, which was to build the greenhouse, was like we were looking for like $2.5 million. Just couldn't get any VCs to be lead investor on that. In retrospect, I understand where they're coming from, because at the time I was still consider myself a hobbyist. And I was the one with the most knowledge as a hobbyist on the team. Everybody else was from like marketing backgrounds, from like, investment banking. Nobody actually had commercial farming experience. So I could see the hesitation there, but everyone was really passionate about the project. But I don't think that was enough for them to dip their toes into that.
What was it about that project that sort of piqued your interest and made you feel like it's something you wanted to give it a shot?
I think because at the time, vertical farming, like the energy cost was still a very big part of the equation. People were still trying to figure that out. And so the architect that we were working with, his background is in like sustainable structures and greenhouses. And he actually created his own greenhouse in upstate New York and claims it to be like a net zero greenhouse. So we were trying to implement some of his techniques, designs into our greenhouse. And so that was kind of what piqued me, where it was like, all right, we're going to keep the glass model so that we don't have to use LEDs 24/7. But then I think it's a difficult model, because I think the industry is you're either a 2D flat greenhouse or you're an indoor vertical 100% LED light. It's very rare to see somebody try to implement a vertical greenhouse type system. I mean, there's a lot of difficulties to it, but that was kind of what piqued me, because not many people were doing that at the time.
What would you say was your biggest takeaway, your lesson learned, whether it was like what to do or what not to do?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would have probably been just trying to go too big before we even did a small scale pilot, right? Like I think it would have been a lot easier if we just tried to raise 50 to 100K, kind of like fence and family round, and then build like a small, like 2,000-3,000 square foot test pilot project.
Working prototype.
And just see how that worked. Yeah, like a prototype thing. Is trying to go full scale, like 40,000-50,000 square feet, and none of us have done it before. It was just too much of a gap.
And so after that, you had a short stint at a company called Homebell, and then you went on to Forkable, which I imagine, was there any helpful lessons learned from the time spent at those two companies?
Not really. I mean, they're both like early stage startups.
Yeah.
Where I was, one of the first 10 to 20 people hired at the company. I guess the only thing would be advantage of taking away from early stage startup is like you just have to be able to do everything. Like if you don't really get hired to just do one role. You do get hired to do one role, but then when you're actually in it, you're juggling like 5 different things at the same time. So it gives you a lot of exposure to like how to get something from 0 to 1 and build stuff from scratch, which definitely helped with getting VegBed off the ground and building from scratch, which I started as a side project while I was working full time.
Yeah. And so obviously this idea, the startup mentality, and I'm sure some of those lessons, whether you realize you were learning them at the time, probably came back to you and were helpful. But what's interesting is that after you left Forkable, you went back into finance. You went back into fig tech. Yeah,
it was a fintech company, fast growing, kind of very altruistic, B Corp, trying to just help out the underserved community with like financial products in terms of like small personal loans and stuff that they wouldn't be able to get at traditional banks or lenders. So the idea piqued my interest, and the role gave me a lot of responsibility. So that's kind of how I ended. So I wasn't really agnostic. I was industry agnostic with like the companies that I worked at, but I was specifically going for companies that were like just at the cusp of kind of getting all the operations and stuff kind of honed out and then just taking it to the next level. So kind of like jumping in there and getting all that set up for them.
It seems like there's also through line of working for companies that are doing good for the world. And I'm wondering if that's a value or something that was, you were taught when you were younger. Is that something that comes from your family, or where do you think that drive comes from?
That's a really good question. Yeah. I know. I guess it's funny because when I look at vertical farming and just agriculture in general, it's like a lot of the issues I think we have with just health in the US and just society and global warming, it can be addressed like in a multifaceted way with agriculture. And so I guess for me doing this, people might not make the connection, but it's like, I hope ultimately part of vertical farming is to have Americans eat healthier, like, I don't know if that will happen, but I'm hoping that down the line that can address that issue and just get vegetables to be more accessible to everybody, I think main reason is like a lot of people eat unhealthy just because it's easy and it's cheap and that's what they have access to. And they don't really have, not everybody can afford a $17 salad at Sweet Greens. Yeah. So it's like,
yeah. Why is that this idea of making it more accessible to a wider audience? Why is that important for you?
Yeah, I've read a lot about just the food industry, the meat industry, the ag industry, like the corn industry, and watched a lot of documentaries, some biased, some not. But yeah, it's just like, I think, like I mentioned, it's a lot of problems that I think we can solve based off of from agriculture itself, especially from the health standpoint. Especially the past 2 years with COVID, and I've had a lot of deaths around me, and so it's kind of put things into perspective for me in terms of health and just kind of not taking things for granted. So I've definitely been more conscious about what I eat, how I eat, stuff like that. But yeah, no, it's like, and I don't want myself to only, ourselves to have access to that. I feel like, a lot of underserved communities aren't able to do that. So it would be nice for them to also have the option of eating healthy and not just, one choice of fast food kind of situation.
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up also just outside the city in Yonkers, New York, and I've lived in the city. I've lived in Brooklyn, in East Village, Lower East Side, and so really of any city, probably in the United States, New York is the closest to my heart, New York City, and I've lived in LA as well. But you're consciously aware of the convenience of like a bodega, like a block away, but then the realization that fresh food is really hard to find, and like the sad lettuce that's in a bodega probably doesn't compare, to what realize is available to just even now. I live in Minneapolis now, and we have a backyard, and we're planting lettuce, kale, cucumbers, tomatoes, and as it starts to fruit, you're picking it and eating it fresh off the vine, and then you just, we've lost that ability to understand, that connection of exactly where our food comes from. And even you talked about, the meat industry, the factory farming, where my partner and I mostly pescatarian, because I think there's a disconnect. And especially if you've grown up, have never had, access to fresh food. One of the speakers at the conference was Stephen from Green Bronx Machine, who, if you've ever seen him speak, his energy is like completely off the charts. And we're going to have him on the show. He's done such good work in just educating and inner city kids. And, he told a story about how, I think one of the kids that was in the program, they grew lettuce and they had a salad, and the kid's like, well, this is the first salad I've ever had. And, just like, whoa, like, just thinking about those things really puts things into perspective. So it's interesting. So I'm wondering, as you're, in that phase of your life, like, when does the idea start to percolate for you? You're obviously have been involved in farming projects, but when you think about starting your own company, presents its own set of challenges and probably a lot of internal questions. So talk a little bit about your mindset, just pre-starting, like what you're thinking and why you feel like that the timing was right.
Yeah, I was always very hesitant. I mean, just coming from my background, my dad, he was an engineer. He worked at the same company for 30 years.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the mindset that my parents were My mom still pushes me to do,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
find a
Same.
job like your dad, work there for like 30 years, retire.
It's the immigrant. I was actually born in El Salvador. My parents came here as immigrants, and it's the, get the secure job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, I appreciate the thought and I understand where you're coming from. But then for me, at least the past couple of years, I felt like it would be a disservice to them to come to this country and have like for a better life for my sister and myself just to do, just to do a 9 to 5 job for the next 30 years of my life. Right. That's not what they came here for me to do. Like I should be striving to do better,
Sure.
better and better, better. So that's kind of how my mentality is but it's tough because they're not against what I'm doing, but they're definitely just afraid of the instability of being an entrepreneur, like, especially
Because they're parents. They want us. They don't want you.
they're like, what about health insurance? I'm like, I got that. Don't worry. My wife's working. I'm on her health insurance. But I think so. I wasn't your typical entrepreneur where like I just dropped everything and went full steam ahead on it. I kind of slowly built this on the side, and I wanted to get it to a point where I felt comfortable enough that okay, I could quit my job and start pursuing this. I wanted to be in a good spot before I jumped in, and at the same time, I had other projects that I had tried prior to VegBed that either failed or I kind of gave up too early. And this was one project, an idea / business that I did not want to give up on, and I don't think a lot of people talk about their failures too much, but I failed a lot. And I knew that if I continued to work full time and I tried to grow this kind of slowly on the side, it would eventually just die off if I didn't spend more time on it. It's like, it's very difficult to be a part-time entrepreneur. Like, no, nobody really does that. I mean, you can do it like to get it off the ground and start a little bit, but at some point you just have to go for it. And so I knew I would regret it for the rest of my life if VegBed failed only due to the lack of time I put into it. Right. If it failed and I'm like, oh, I was only spending 4 hours a week, then that's on me. That's stupid. Why did I do that? Like if I put 110% effort in, I spent 80 hours a week on it and it still failed, I'd be comfortably fine with that. Like I gave it my all, I gave it a shot and it didn't work out. But if it didn't work out just because I didn't put effort, then I would be very upset about that.
Yeah, because if you think about the things that you have that are accessible to you when you're just getting started, you may not have all the funding, but you do have more time than money. So to your point, I think putting that time in and just putting that sweat equity in to just see if this is a valid idea. So and I don't also want to call it the fact, this idea of failing as an entrepreneur. It's something that I've had to learn myself and be more comfortable with, as those first couple are really painful and very expensive. And you just sit there on the floor, wallowing in like, what did I do wrong? And then I think what you realize is just the more you understand that it's sort of the nature of entrepreneurship is you have to try a lot of things. And, there's the example of Edison and how many different variations of the light bulb he tried before he landed on the one that worked. And, the Gretzky quote of, you miss all the shots you don't take, and so just, the cliche stuff, but they're cliche, but there's a truth to all of them. And I think it's this idea of understanding how to get up faster and how to recover and just figure out like that didn't work. Okay, let's try the next one. And you're iterating on the way. And then each one of those failures gives you like a little bit of a learning point to understand, okay, now I understand why that didn't work. And you sort of compile those. But I don't think you have the successes later on in your life if you don't have those early failures, because, you probably get a sense of false confidence. And I think the sooner you scrape your knee, and you get up and then you realize, it's like learning to ride a bike, right? You're going to fall down a couple times, but then you know what not to do and how better to move forward. So how many different ideas did you have, or, even if they wouldn't come to fruition before you landed on the concept for VegBed, and then we'll get into that specifically.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment for anybody that's out there that's going to be listening, that's trying to pursue entrepreneurship. The one biggest piece of advice I could give is one of the failures that happens, I think, with most entrepreneurs is that they think if they build it, people will come. And that's the number one mistake, where they have, oh, this is an awesome idea. Like everyone's going to love it. Like, yeah, this person told me they love it. Da, da, da. And they spend all this time, they spend all this money. They build this thing, they create this product, this website, this software, app, or whatever. And then nobody wants it, or nobody downloads it, or nobody buys it. So I think in the beginning, really figure out whether or not your customer actually wants that. Talk to people. Like, it doesn't cost money to interview someone. Just ask them for their opinion, ask them what their pain points are, right? And that's how you can get the best.
Have you heard of the book, The Mom Test?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, perfect.
It's one of the, I was part of a fellowship with On Deck for no code. And so one of the projects was to launch a site but also get users to it. And then to your point, this usability testing, like speak to customers and saying like, is this something you would use? Like, and I think the premise is like, make it so easy that your mom would understand it and she'd be able to explain the concept to it. But it's a really highly recommended. We'll make sure it's in the show notes, the Mom Test for new entrepreneurs.
But back to your question about like some of the failures, they pretty much stem from what I just spoke about like thinking that these ideas were good and building something, and then just realizing that either it was too difficult to use or people just didn't want it. For example, one of the failures I had, I don't know if you know Linktree.
Oh, yeah.
On the Instagram. So basically, like at the time, I didn't know Linktree existed. I think they actually launched like 6 months before we tried to essentially build the same thing. And so we knew that there was this problem with Instagram with the clickable link thing. And so me and my friend, he was a software engineer, we tried to build out basically what Linktree was doing. However, our version of it was a lot more difficult. In our minds, it was intuitive, right? Oh, it's like, oh yeah, you add this photo and then you add the link to your product, and then when they click it, it'll go to that. But it was just very, as soon as we like built it and had people test it, they were just super confused by it. They didn't know how to do this. Like all the stuff we thought was intuitive was not intuitive, right?
Yeah.
And so people just didn't really, a lot, like maybe we had like 50 people try it, and some of them just gave us some feedback, but nobody actually used it, long term. And that kind of just fizzled out because I was working full time at the time, and we were just like, man, people aren't going to use this. It's too complicated. We have to rethink this. And that kind of fizzled out. So that's a great example of just like, we should have just talked to customers first before doing anything, but that was a lesson learned.
Yeah, it's interesting that when you think about that tool, how deceptively easy, and it's just a simple concept, the fact that you're just creating an alternative website. And I've been able to recreate that exact functionality by using Notion, which is a free tool, and just like you create a page and just put a link to it.
Put all the links in. Yeah,
it's but it's a Linktree's a big company now, and it's doing a lot of things, and it's sometimes you just need to solve a very simple pain point. So talk to me, how did you arrive at VegBed, and for the benefit of the listener, also explain what it is and the idea behind it.
Yeah, sure. So after FarmStock parted ways, I still wanted to be in the agriculture industry in some form, and I wanted to start a company where I wouldn't need to raise $2.5 million, that I knew I could bootstrap. And I think most people that start into hydroponics and indoor farming can agree that the first thing that they experience is using rockwool, which is a great medium, works well, it's cheap, it's pretty much been the industry standard for like 50 years. But I felt that there could be a better way to grow plants, especially since rockwool is, not sustainable. It's a molten glass rock, essentially.
For those new to actual even indoor farming, can you explain just even that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. For those that are new, rockwool is essentially this stone wool that is used to germinate and grow plants. It's usually sold in a cube form, and it's made from, I think, molten basalt rock that's superheated to a couple thousand degrees, and then it's spun into this really fine kind of yarn. So it's essentially glass fibers. So it's utilized in home insulation, and that's kind of, I think, why it's been so heavily used and so cheap, because it's utilized in other applications. So it's so predominant in the housing market.
Do you know the story behind it? I'm curious if it was just one of those things where there was like, how these all start, there's like excess supply of a product and people are like, where else could we use this?
What exactly? That's probably, I don't know the story behind how rockwool got involved in hydroponics, but I could totally see that happening where it's like, this thing absorbs water.
Yeah, like the industry drives it. They're like, it was probably like a waste product or something like that.
Exactly.
Like, how to use it. So it's interesting because I'm curious, and I'm always like to love the entrepreneurial mindset. And so you see that there's rockwool being used, but you also feel like there's an opportunity to improve it.
Yes, I think the main reason was because at the time when I was learning about vertical farming, indoor farming, pretty much every company touts about, oh, we use 90% less water, we use like 90% electricity, 99% less land, and all these kind of sustainable growing methods. But they never ever, they never talked about the downstream waste. Like, what do they do with the rockwool? They just toss it, right? It doesn't degrade. So,
Yeah.
but that's never discussed, right? Whenever you look at the stats of a website of a vertical farm, they're always talking about the water saving, the land saving, energy savings, but they never talk about the waste.
I will give a shout out to, I think I spoke to Andrew, who's the chief, I think he's the innovation officer at IGS. And he was talking about this, like sort of like this dirty little secret of vertical farming. And so I think it might be interesting. I'm going to have him come on and just specifically talk about waste, because I want us to talk about, the good and the bad and the stuff that where there is room for improvement. So, but yeah, definitely continue.
Yeah, I'm curious about that as well. But yeah, the other thing I actually just learned while I was at Green Tech is that in the Netherlands and Germany, if you use rockwool in your farms, you actually have to pay a fee to dispose of it. So they're kind of cracking down on that now.
Yeah. Okay.
Which bodes well for the industry. I mean, I think it's about time. So that's kind of like the whole vision for VegBed was to try to shift the industry away from using rockwool.
And so it's talking about entrepreneur mindset and trying a bunch of different things. How many different iterations did you go through?
Oh, man. So yeah, VegBed is right now, our core product is the bamboo fiber microgreen mat. Initially, the first project I had was a grow cube, kind of like rockwool, but it was made out of foam. However, obviously it's not sustainable because it's made out of foam. It worked well, like people liked it, but then after talking to customers, they were like, do you have a more sustainable option other than foam? And so that evolved kind of into what we have today, where I also, prior to the bamboo mat, I had a foam mat that I made for a customer and went through multiple iterations with him on that. And then finally, customer just kept asking for a more sustainable option. So that's how I shifted over and pivoted to the bamboo fiber.
And so how big is the team now, and who are you working with?
It's just me, and I have someone helping me with like biz dev and marketing.
Okay.
A couple of contractors that I've had to help out with like web design and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mainly me.
And what's been the early adoption by companies, to the extent that you can talk about it? Who are you working with, or the types of companies you're working with?
Yeah, a couple people have NDAs with, but mainly, so right now on the B2B retail side, we're offered on True Leaf Market and Hort Americas. Currently working with 2 other distributor retailers now in the US to carry the product. But most of the direct-to-consumer customers and the farmers I work with, they're usually, I would say, small to mid-sized farms that grow in their local market, probably like 200 to 300 trays a week of microgreens. And they'll usually sell at farmers markets or restaurants and like the local supermarkets. So that's like the core of the customer right now. Not too many individual hobbyists, but mainly like small, middle-sized farms, microgreen farmers.
And from a sustainability perspective, like how do you explain it to folks how it's different than the rockwool, and what does that look like, and how, I mean, does it get into the specifics of like how fast it decomposes?
Yeah, so bamboo itself, when you look at the growth chart of bamboo, it grows exponentially faster as time goes on. Even in the beginning, it grows really, really fast. Like I think within the first month, it grows about like 6 to 12 inches a day. After like 1 month, it starts growing like, more than a foot a day. So in terms of like sustainability, like when you chop one down, they grow like literally like weeds.
Yeah.
And the other thing, compared to like hemp and some of the other products out there in the market, bamboo doesn't require a lot of resources or like purposeful farming to grow them. They just kind of grow wild along the riverbeds, like in Southeast Asia. So you don't have to actually like mow down farmland to grow bamboo. That's just kind of wildly growing everywhere. So definitely highly sustainable. In terms of like biodegradability tests, I'm actually in the process of talking to a couple companies now to get like an official report. I've had customers throw it like in their compost bins,
okay,
and stuff like that. But I want to kind of get like a more statistical analysis of like the time and everything like that. So that's in the works now.
Yeah. So from a product perspective, can you talk a little bit about what you're thinking about? Like, where are there opportunities for you to grow? And is it specifically, you think there are use cases that are still applicable in vertical farming that you could branch out to, or because of the nature of the materials, are there other opportunities for you to do some different product offerings?
Yeah, I definitely am currently prototyping different forms of the product, mainly like a cube form. It's quite difficult though, because I don't want to add any foreign materials into the product, because right now it's just straight up bamboo fiber, which is
Yeah.
basically tangled together with a mechanical process. So there's no glue or any binders in it. And I'm trying to stay away from that. But because of that, it's hard to create like a solid 3-dimensional structure out of it. So it's a challenge that I've been working on. So I'm working on some prototypes right now. So hopefully they work out. So that's kind of like the next evolution of this, getting into like a cube form, so that it's more widely usable besides just microgreens. And then also like with tomato and larger crop production, they have like these big bags. Right now it's usually like a big slab of rockwool, which is like kind of like 3 or 4 feet long and like 6 inches high. They'll use that for like tomato production, cucumber production, peppers and stuff like that. So getting a product like that out, I think, will be really beneficial, because most of the pictures I see of like tomato and vine crop production is utilizing like big slabs of rockwool. I have no idea what they do with them afterwards. They probably just toss them. So that would be great to help shift that away. And then also, I think just in general, maybe like some sort of soil amendment or a competitor to maybe cocoa coir is, I think, a lot of the
What's the cocoa cord?
cocoa coir. It's like the thrown away coconut husks that they use for as a garden medium. But a lot of the potting soil out there, I don't know if many people know, but it's predominantly composed of stagnant peat moss, which is pretty unsustainable product, and grows at the opposite rate of bamboo, usually like a few millimeters a year at the most. Yeah. And a lot of the potting mixes are like 60-70% stagnant peat moss. So I think there's opportunity there to kind of get a more sustainable soil amendment on the market as well.
Where do you see like the biggest opportunity or the biggest challenge for you as the founder and as the person who's wearing a lot of the hats in the business? So, where do you want to focus your time so you have the most, are you looking for new clients? Are you spending some time on innovation? Are you doubling down on the relationships you have already? So I'm just curious where your mind's at. And I'm sure every day when you wake up, it's a different answer. But I'm curious what's top of mind for you now.
Honestly, pretty much all the 3 things that you just listed are priority for me right now. Just expanding the business in terms of getting to more distribution retail, getting a couple more commercial farms online would be great. And then just expanding the product line as well. I think of the 2 main things that I'm going to be focusing on. The other thing that, I'm not an expert in and I don't have a degree in is like material science. And I think finding somebody that is knowledgeable about materials and products to be able to help me kind of create these prototypes in the future, I think would be very beneficial.
Have you given any thought to any of the processes that you've put in place for how these are created or assembled, and maybe applying for patents for any of them? Because there might be some opportunities for something that you're doing specifically with this combination of materials in this form. And I know that there's a cost associated, obviously, with that. But one of the companies I advise in the podcasting space has done some similar work with. It's actually this company that we're using, Squadcast, but they've got some patents that were eventually approved. It took a couple of years, but that's just something to kind of like, get the ideas going for where there might be opportunities for you. Since this is, you're relatively new in this space and using these materials, you might be doing it in a way that's new for the industry.
Yeah, no, I'm totally open to that idea. At least with the new product development, I will look into that. Word of advice for anybody that's going out for patents, and I learned the hard way, is if you have an idea or a product and you intend on patenting it, don't talk about it or post photos or anything like that too early, because once it's out in the ether of the internet, you have 2 years. And I didn't realize that you have this eminent domain of 2 years once it's out in the internet or in public, you got 2 years to patent it. And I had discussed and talked about VegBed early on a Instagram post. And then when I finally decided, it was like right at the 2-year cutoff mark.
Yeah.
And it was, the lawyer said it was too late. So
okay,
that's a good lesson learned there. So in the future, just try to get the ball rolling as soon as you start discussing that product, or just don't talk about it until you talk to the lawyer.
Word to the wise. So as an entrepreneur and as someone who's worked with I'm sure you've had different bosses and different mentors, can you point to anyone that's been helpful for you along this journey? Because I know a lot of times this can be a lonely road, and we're always looking for inspiration or people to motivate us or to help us learn so we don't make the same mistakes that other people have made. So have folks like that, anyone come to mind that have been helpful for you along this journey?
That's a very good question. it's difficult, not like in terms of my previous roles. I don't think there was a direct, because naturally, like I was very hesitant to allow any of my full-time jobs know that I was working on this other side, because obviously they're going to think like, oh, you're Albert spending more time in his, side business than he has his work. So I've always kept it very under the radar. So not until like my previous job I knew about it and they were supportive, but for the most part, it was very kind of under the radar. So I didn't really was able to like discuss strategies or talk about, like the entrepreneurial mindset with these companies.
Yeah.
But I mean, the most help I have had so far is just this accelerator that I just finished this week, SLP program. It's been running for the past 6 months, but 30 other founders and entrepreneurs, and the whole network has been so great resource to just be able to like talk to people in that same mindset and that same state that you are. So that has been very, very helpful for sure.
Very good. What's a tough question you had to ask yourself recently?
The last class we had for the accelerator was talking about stop, pivot, or persist, right? And I think that's a question that a lot of founders ask every single day when they wake up, right? Whether to stop, pivot, or persist. And the one thing that that we've learned that they're trying to still is like it's okay to stop. Like a lot of people just stop. It just doesn't work out. There's nothing to be ashamed of, but you just have to kind of be honest with yourself and see where you want to take it and where you think it can go. And so for me, it's like just thinking about that every day. But I pivoted and persisted, so I'm gonna stick with the persist for now.
Yeah.
And when people ask how things are going, I just say I'm persisting. That's kind of like our joke that we had when non-founders and non-entrepreneurs ask you how you're doing. It's always like a very difficult kind of conversation.
It's hard to explain to people who aren't in it, who haven't done it. It's like, well, you're doing what? Like, because to your earlier comment, you never turn it off. Like, I mean, I wake up and I think about all the things that I have to like get done in my business. And, I think at some point, because if you're working on it day to day, then you have a business, you don't have a lifestyle, and so I think that I'm trying to move now to the point where I can hire someone like to do the day to day, so I can just focus on like the strategy, and the sales, and I think it's a continuum. And I think to people who are just comfortable and need that direct deposit in their bank account every every 2 weeks, and then like I remember the first time that didn't happen, I was like, okay, I'm an entrepreneur now, and I gotta like fend for myself here. So it's not for everyone. It's not for the faint-hearted either, because definitely lots of ups and downs and some sleepless nights sometimes. But I think you'll find that as you go deeper into the community and you align with organizations like the incubator you were a part of, I think you'll find that there's more like-minded folks in the space that you can talk to. You go to these conferences, and I'm sure you can have some really inspiring conversations. And then when you feel like you're doing something that's contributing to this overall need we have to just, make people more aware of, just growing food, and then the importance of, having direct access to your food supply and not being impacted by the supply chain, and just all these things come to mind. This is some of the topics we've been covering on the show. So I think hopefully at the end of the day, that inspires you to move forward with your mission.
Yeah, totally. I think it's kind of back to what you're just saying with talking about food, and 98% of the lettuce that's grown in the U.S. is grown in California and Arizona. And when you think of it, it's like, does it really need to be that way? Like most industries, you want to have like a centralized kind of area where you create the product to get it as cheap as possible. But I think with food, having that model doesn't make sense. It should be decentralized, where we just have more local hubs that create food and just deliver within a 400 or 500 mile radius, as opposed to just one place growing, just shipping everywhere.
Yeah.
So, I think I'm hoping that vertical farming can lead to more of a decentralized hub for food production, so we don't have to rely on just one area of the nation to provide us with food. It reduces risk too, especially with like E. coli, drought.
Yeah.
Just a lot of things,
So as we wrap up, given the audience and the focus for this show on the players in the space and the people who are interested in the space, is there a specific ask that you have for my audience?
No, if you have questions about entrepreneurship and just kind of like the journey, some of like, I have many mistakes that I can offer and lessons learned. So I'm always happy to talk to other people in the space that are starting off or have questions or strategies, kind of what I went through. Also, if you're, in farming, you're a producer, grower, retailer, distributor, also happy to talk to you about the product and trying it out and getting you some samples. More than happy to do that.
Well, thanks for reaching out, Albert. And it's always interesting to get the gamut of experiences here from people who've been, just getting into vertical farming, who, early adopters into the space, or people that are just have an interest in this industry and now have, figuring out what their specific specialty and niche is. And I'm glad we got to connect and we got to tell your story, because I think they're all inspiring. So I appreciate you taking your time and sharing your story with my audience.
Yeah, Harry, thanks. It was really fun. I love that we kind of dove really way back and kind of just talked about mindset and how I grew up. I think that's not a lot of people talk about. They just kind of talk about the company, and that's kind of it. But I think getting a sense of more of a background of the person's history and mindset is definitely helpful and eye-opening for listeners as well.
And inspiring.
That's good. Yeah, that too.
And so VegBed, VEGBED.com for the website. Any other place you want to send folks to connect with you to learn more?
Yeah, email. I'm just Albert at vegbed.com.
Okay.
And all the handles on Facebook, Instagram's all just VegBed, so pretty easy to find.
All right. Thanks again for your time, Albert. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Harry.
Thanks again to Albert of VegBed for coming on the show and sharing his story. Very inspiring to see what he's doing as an entrepreneur and how he saw a need in this industry. I'm really excited to support him as he builds his network. Thanks again to our Season 5 title sponsor, Cultivated. If you're looking to a vertical farm and don't know where to start or which technology would suit your needs, reach out to them today. And best of all, their service is free because they work on behalf of their partners. Learn more at cultivated.com, and that's spelled cultivated.com. Just leave out that last E. Podcast production and marketing provided by Fullcast. Learn more at fullcast.co about how a podcast may be helpful for your brand. And as a reminder, if you're enjoying this show, please leave us a rating and a review at ratethispodcast.com/VFP. We'll be sure to read those out on future episodes. That's a wrap on Season 5. I'm really excited to bring a whole new slate of interviews to you for Season 6. I'll tease out a couple of the companies and the names that I've got lined up. We're looking at Alison Koff returning from Ayuno, Philip Labrie from Green Forges, Henry Gordon-Smith makes a return visit to the show, Eric Eisel from Growflux, Dr. Christian Toma from Cholera, Christos Raftuogiannis from City Crop, and Amy Wu, who I connected with at Farms to Incubators. Until we meet again, here's to your health.
Thanks for listening. To read the full show notes for this episode, which includes any links mentioned in the episode, as well as a full show transcription, visit verticalfarmingpodcast.com. There, you can sign up for our email list to be notified when new episodes are published.